came that we were talking about in one of my first forum calls was people's perception of consistency. And when you say like, oh, you have to be consistent, people automatically assume you have to be perfect, but you actually don't. And he was giving the example in the transformation challenge, the winners on average miss, I don't remember how long the challenge is, 16 weeks or 14 weeks or something, but over that course of time they actually don't track or complete an entire week out of that entire challenge time frame and still end up with the most results. And I thought that was really interesting because with habitual growth, we obviously talk about being consistent and building your days and doing things intentionally that need to be done. But I also was like, well, that's really cool too. And I know we've seen it over some challenges where, yes, the consistency matters, but it's also a consistency for the long run, not a perfect 1, 2 week, 3 week stretch at a time. So I was curious about your feedback if you've noticed that too, or thought about that definition of consistency and how people perceive it.
Let me ask one more. That's great. I think that's a really solid question, but let me ask one more question back first. Is the consistency about doing it perfect? So is it truly the delivery or is it the frequency of the consistency? Because you can be consistent and do it once a week, and that can be considered consistent by some people versus our definition, which more often than not is everyday delivery.
That's what I'm talking about, is so to get real change, if you're building a positive habit or you're building your essential action list, the consistency that we're talking about is maybe you're not conquering every single day of every single week in a 3 month time span, but more weeks than not, you have conquered every single day. That's really where the momentum and the biggest change occurs. And it's not that for a week you conquered a day and then you fell off for 2 weeks. It's
Yeah.
just that compounding effect as time goes on, trying to achieve that level of consistency at the highest degree.
Yeah. No, yeah. So I completely agree with that. I think this is almost that analysis paralysis that people get into. So it's the internal voice that Andy always talks about, right? You know, the bitch voice. But I for me, yes, it's a bitch voice, but it's also like it's also Nate 1.0. I have these dialogues all the time about different things. And one of the items is just delivering on what I put together for the day. The consistent thing that I can absolutely attest to is having the intent of going in and creating a daily essential action list. I think from go, that's the biggest problem. When
Yeah.
we see this time and time again, this all sounds really sexy to a lot of people. I'm gonna grow, I'm gonna perform, I'm gonna level up, I'm gonna do all these things, and they download habitual growth and they just forget about it.
Yeah.
And they can't even open an app every single day to be consistent, right? That is step one. It's like, yes, step zero is downloading the app and setting up your profile. Step one is then I have to be consistent and actually open this up. And so one of the things that we recommend when you download the app and you start using it is, one, set your notifications so that you are reminded by the app every single day to create your essential action list. For me personally, I have found if I do it the morning of, I'm more often than not just throwing things on it. I've done it, and at the end of the day too, where I'm just like, okay, like, what did I
What
do?
do I
Like, I
need to
needed to
do?
move these things, but like, okay, I did these things, so I'm gonna add them. Like, I've been in that phase as well. I perform best and make the most amount of progress when I do it the night before. I
Oh,
wrap up work right before I go to bed. If I'm not doing other things, I'll just say, okay, what do I need to accomplish tomorrow to really move the needle? Then right behind that, it is setting up a goal for 2 weeks of just consistently opening the app. And the analysis paralysis that I was talking about happens because it's a rude awakening for a lot of people. It's like just a very simple task of reminding themselves to open up an app is difficult for a lot of people because you don't have that routine. You're not used to it yet. And so, I think that's the piece that really gets me. And I think it's a sticking point for anything for people,
yeah.
right? But the way that I oftentimes kind of mold it into my mind is, what is it going to take? Like, other systems can I bring into the process to help me move in that direction? So if, as an example, I am new to habitual growth, I've already shared with you and some of our viewers that I could not conquer the day 2 days in a row when I first started this process
Yeah.
3 years ago. It was impossible for me. I literally was like conquering maybe 1 or 2 days a week. What I had to do is then basically just say, all right, I have to start really small, right? I have to make these incremental changes to build a new routine that will ultimately become the new lifestyle that I'm developing. And I don't think people think about it like that.
No.
So if it were me, and I'm sorry, I know I'm long-winded on this, but if it were me and I were to download the app, one of the things that I would do is like, I know that this is new to me. I'm not going to think about it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go get some sticky notes and I'm going to post it on my bathroom mirror or in my car or something so that I have a secondary system to remind me if I don't see the app notification or I forget to do it.
Yeah.
That is my backup plan, similar to like your snooze or a secondary alarm on your phone to get up.
And I think that that's a good point. And actually, there's two things I wanted to pull out. Is one, again, to reiterate that, 3 years ago when you started, you couldn't even conquer 2 days in a row. And 3 years seems like a really long time, but it actually goes fast. And if you think about it, more often than not, I would say 9 out of your 10 days, you are conquering a day. And if you haven't conquered the day and you're defeated, it's generally only one or two things that you haven't done. You've still made your list, you've still made progress. And so just that progression of consistently opening the app, creating a list, figuring out the tools and tricks that you need to be able to remember to do that, then get through your list and then build the consistency of conquering the day. Like that to me is the progression of consistency that we're talking about. And it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's nothing wrong with setting a calendar reminder, or I mean, I have one right now with a good friend of mine that just downloaded the app and he wants to get into building better habits, but he needs someone to hold him accountable. So now to help assist him, and I think this is good for everybody to hear, is it's not just about you, help other people on the journey. I set a calendar invite on my calendar every day that says text this person. And
Mhm.
that's when I send my list, send
Yeah.
me yours. And, eventually he will get to the point where it becomes consistent. But I think it's okay to use those mechanisms to get into the routine. Now I don't need it because I'm so used to it.
Yeah.
And I'm used to going in and checking. And so that's, I think, a really good call out is you give yourself some grace as you start and figure out what reminders that you need to place in your day to be able to develop the routine of opening the app basically subconsciously at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah, no, and that's the analysis paralysis. Like, people hear 3 years and they're like, "Oof, like that seems like a really long time." Was that another example I would give is I was at the gym this morning, and I have a current personal goal to do 200 push-ups a day for the next 3 months.
Cool.
And, I'm down there doing these push-ups, right? And I'm thinking about this because I want to roll this out to some other people. I have some people that I'm going to tap in the back of my mind, but they're, 200 push-ups at first blush sounds like a lot. And it is a lot for
It is
some
a
people,
lot.
right?
Yeah.
But it's also not a lot for some other people. And, it doesn't mean somebody can't do 10 a day, but they can do it consistently, right? And then instead of 10, it's 12, and then 15, and then 20, or whatever it looks like. But so many people miss that step of just getting started, right? I love Nike's slogan. It has a very different meaning in my life now of like, just do it. It sounds so silly to me, but I don't know why over the last 2 years that's just resonated in the back of my mind. But that's literally just a part of life. And it sounds cliche. Every guru talks about it all the time, but that's just the reality. There's no way around it. You just have to get started. You have to start at your level and then progress up, or just maintain it and be consistent. But, as an example, what you said about your friend and just texting your contact every day to remind him, I think what habitual growth does for a lot of people is they don't want to be exposed. They don't actually want to know the deeper truth of what they have not been doing, right? And I hear a lot of people on some of the content that you and I consume where it's just like people are afraid of who they can become. I actually don't think that. Like, I
No.
don't think people have any clue. I just don't think people want to know how bad they are. And I don't mean that from a negative connotation, but here's a perfect example. I have a contact that's a very good friend of mine who, when we launched Habitual Growth, actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about this business for 3 years. I need somebody like you to hold me accountable and to check in on me because this is really important in my life." I was like, "Great, I will do that every
I
day."
will
I
do
did
it.
exactly what you did. I was like, "I will follow up. I got this. It is no problem." I was like, "Download Habitual Growth. We will get you on the program." And, and there's no cost to him whatsoever. You know what happened? I reached out to that guy 4 times. He never made a single move. And it
Yeah.
wasn't 4 days in a row. It was over a span of probably a month to 6 weeks. He did not take one single action towards doing anything for his business, despite him saying, "This is a priority for me. It's so important to me. This is one of the things I really want to focus on because I've been thinking about it for so long now." And he just literally never took any action. And you can't change anybody like that. They have to just do it.
I think that's another thing to point out, because we talk, obviously the first part of habitual growth is the goal setting process. So where are you going? Why are you going there? And I think a lot of people, in my experience, and it sounds like maybe your friend as well, we start because, or we say something because it sounds really good, or somewhere in our dreams it's like, oh, I really want to do this, and you mean it, but when the rubber hits the road, there's some disconnect, whether that's truly a timing, a resource, a competing priority, or just not a general understanding of how that fits into what you can do today. And so when we talk about living with intent, starting with the alignment of who you authentically are and where you want to go, that's really what I try to get people to think about, because you can throw 8,000 goals up and they all sound great. And I can tell you 500 of mine that would be wonderful to achieve. But at the end of the day, which ones am I going to really do something about? And that's where you need to focus. And so maybe for that individual, it's not, I need to be accountable starting this business. It could just literally be, I just need to have someone and hold myself accountable to working out 3 times a week. Sometimes it's that
Mhm.
granular and that simple, where people just need to be able to build the confidence in themselves through that daily consistency, because something matters to them so much that they're willing to change the routine to get there,
Yeah.
even if it's baby steps at a time.
Yeah. And I think that's the root. I think people have to really figure out what they are willing to sacrifice
Yeah.
to get what they want. And a lot of people fall, specifically in the US, a lot of people just fall into the category of my life is good enough. And it's like, I want all these
Yeah.
things, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've got this paying job that like, yeah, money's a little stressful. But I can sleep in until 9, and I can afford most of the things that I want, but I'm still gonna complain about some of the debt that I have. Well, like, whatever it is, right? But it's really, really, really hard for people to get out of the routines, but more so the mental boxes that they've put themselves in because they are so comfortable, and giving up that comfort is really uncomfortable, and it is a lot of pain. And for me personally, I can't speak to anybody else, but for me personally, I had to go through some really hard things for me. Doesn't mean they're the hardest in the world, doesn't mean anybody hasn't been through them, but for me personally, to break through some of these mental barriers, I had to really step back and just say, what am I driving at? What is more important to me? To go back and get a job that pays me well and I can just put my feet up and turn off work at 5 p.m., or it's way more important for me to be an example for my kids and to create something completely new and add value back to my network and my communities and the world. And that's not an easy decision. And it's not one
So
that a lot of people, number one, think about, but number two, are willing to make.
do you think that there's a difference in people? And I know it's a little rhetorical, since you and I think very much the same when it comes to this, but I would say for you and I, throughout most of our life, if not all of it, there's always this underlying kind of nagging thing that says, what else is out there? What else can I do? How much further can I go?
Yeah.
And yet I've also come across people, and it's a genuine question, because I don't know if sometimes people turn a blind eye or they just don't hear the voice, but I found people that are like, no, I'm good where I'm at. Like, I want to be able to just like work an 8 to 5
Mhm.
and that's it. So, do you think there's two breeds of people, or do you think people had it at one point and became complacent and eventually that faded out? And I'm just curious, how do you think that works for people?
No, I think that's a great question. I actually think about this a lot. And I think about it a lot because I ask myself lots of questions like, what am I doing? Is this really worth it? Like why am I putting myself or my family through all of whatever is going on in the moment when I see my friends that have really well-paying jobs and take all sorts of vacations and are very comfortable in life? I think I think they're more than two, but I think that there are different people that have different viewpoints on life, different perspectives, right? I'm never going to be a Zen, yoga, mental calmness person. I am a builder and I'm a driver, and I've been that way since the beginning. Now, I do think environments shape people to some degree, but I wouldn't say the first, much as I was making fun of the yogis, I don't think that that's an environmental thing, nor do I think that that's a complacency thing. I don't know what that answer is. I know very hard workers who just are at much more peace than I probably am. I also know people that make a lot of money and have no interest in doing anything above and beyond making money. Part of habitual growth is growing other people. It's contributing back. It is our obligation, our duty to help people push themselves to the next level and get to where they want to go. Not everybody sees that same thing. And I was actually just thinking about somebody very close to us that does that. And it's not a bad thing. It's not right or wrong. So I do think it comes down to people's perspectives of life, but I also think that there's an opportunity for people to potentially think more realistically about, or more not realistically, more holistically about what their life represents. If
Yeah.
you are just chasing money, is that good enough? Maybe it is for you.
Yeah.
But, if you, as an example, are a Christian, part of your obligation is to make heaven more crowded. So you want to go out and you want to create value for other people and you want to give back and contribute. So that doesn't mean you can't do it in other ways. You don't have to be the front facing person for a business. You don't have to be a CEO. You can have impact in other ways, but are you doing those things? And how do they come together that excites you in a way that helps you get to a bigger vision than just like these are the things I'm doing for the day?
I agree. I think all those things play in, and I think people evolve and change over their life as well, sometimes positively, hopefully more often than negatively. But I think people do tend to shift and evolve and grow in different ways, or retract based on significant challenges or hardships, and maybe not having that baseline of resilience to be able to come back to the square one and start again. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking about it, and I had this conversation yesterday with a friend, is our tendency to put ourselves in a bucket, like a black and white all or nothing bucket. And we were actually talking about how we defined ourselves as like all or nothing people. Either I'm all in and it's game on and everything else fades in the darkness, or I'm all out and then it's
Yeah.
like anything goes. And I wonder if sometimes that's how people view growth is, in order to truly be able to grow, I have to be all in all the time. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, because if you look holistically at a person, you may be growing at different rates in different areas of your life. And that's completely okay too. And there may be areas that you just don't have the time, desire, or resources to invest in that area in
Yeah.
that season of your life.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sometimes a misperception that happens with people with growth, is we bucket ourselves as either I have to be all in or I have to be not in at all. Just what do you think about that and how people kind of label themselves?
I would agree with your statements. I don't think you need to be all in or all out. There's definitely gray areas. I I would say though, we all have a tendency to one, look at the world through our own perspective and viewpoints, just based on what our experiences, environments, etc. And so everybody has a different view, a different neural pathway that puts information together, and that's shaped by various things throughout life. And so everybody has a different viewpoint no matter what. Nobody is going to agree, and we expect everybody to see things the exact same way that we do. That's just never going to happen in life. I think the other thing right behind that is, this is interesting because Andy, he said it on his podcast today. He was like, people don't, you, if you're not growing, you're not just standing still, you're actually declining. That to me is the more important statement, because I agree with that fully. And the reason is, when people don't have a standard for themselves, or they're not trying to improve, they are letting certain things go. Their standards are slipping. They're not going to consistently have the same standards every day. I'm going to watch one Netflix show today. That's fine. Maybe I should have gone to bed, but then 3 weeks later, it's okay. Well, now I'm going to have some popcorn and watch a Netflix show. And then, a year later, I'm having a bowl of ice cream, 3 cookies, and a Netflix show. But it's real. And that's
Yeah.
what I think happens to a lot of people, is they stop caring about certain things. They don't understand the connection between how that impacts other things in their life. And so when you have a standard and you are striving for personal growth, you're going somewhere. When you don't have that and you are drifting, it has a negative impact on your life that you may not see for years, right? And I could tell my story at a different time, but that's just one of the things that is very apparent to me, but also in the people that I've surrounded myself with, because a lot of people go through it. You wake up at some point, and it doesn't mean you hate your life, but all of a sudden you've deviated from a path that you thought was different, and you thought, wow, I'd be way over here. How many professionals do you hear say that in your networks? It's like, wow, I'm X age, I'm 40 years old, and I really thought at this level I'd be a director or a VP or something like that. And it's like, but that's because you didn't apply yourself. You skipped the workout. You didn't volunteer for the projects. You weren't giving back to your community. You just went home and kind of turned everything off. And to your point of like the all out, what happens when you're out of people's perspective and vision, you kind of just fade into the black. It's not a negative thing, but you just kind of disappear because you've turned yourself off from that. And I think that's the more important thing, where it's, people have to remember, if you don't have a standard for yourself, if you're not going somewhere, you are declining, whether you see it in the immediacy or not. It is there. And at some point you're going to wake up. It could be 3 years, could be 5 years, it could be 10 years down the line, and you're going to be off course, and it might be too late to correct that.
So I have two things to maybe challenge you on. One, from the professional aspect. Yes, I hear it too. And you could even say there are days that I have that say I'm this many years old, and why am I restarting again, doing the things that I'm doing? And so I think it is true that if you put in the work and you control what you can control and you keep your standards high over the course of time, you are more likely to head in the direction that you want to go. That being said, there are things that happen to people that are outside of their control. So people may find themselves in a completely different position than they thought they would be. And what I want people to hear is that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't do the work or it didn't pan out the way it was supposed to, because there will always be things that are outside of your control. And it
Mhm.
could just be getting over a hump and saying, I couldn't control this. This is now the situation that I find myself in, because I've done all these things to prepare myself and to put in the work and to show value. I am confident that a new opportunity or a different opportunity will come to my door, and I will be able to continue my path through that door that opens. I think sometimes when we are focused on growth professionally, we see one path because that's what's told, especially in large organizations. It's matrix. You go to this level, you do this, then you go to this level. If you do this, then you go to that level. And that's not always how it works for people. Sometimes they take like this jagged route to get where they're going. Um, so I think that's important for people to hear, is you may set your sights in one spot, and yes, you can put in the work and you can control everything that you can control. Don't throw in the towel at the first sign of a huge challenge or a deviation, because it actually could be just a redirection for you at that point. And the work that you've put in will ultimately come to fruition later on down the road.
Yeah.
Um, So I think that's important. The other piece that I wanted to ask you about, because I do agree. So in general, putting in time to grow and develop yourself, it's important. And in all areas, if you're not putting in work, yes, you can be seen to decline in certain areas. But when people think about that, it sounds like you have to have all the balls in the air at all times. And I think that's where I don't necessarily agree. I think, yes, there are certain things that I hold very important, because to be the best version of myself, I need to eat healthy. I need to get my workouts in. I need to get my sleep. I like to learn something every single day. Like, there are aspects that I just know work for me to make me the best version of myself, to give me the most runway for momentum. That being said, like, there are people in our small original habitual growth group that have slightly different priorities when you look at their list. And it doesn't make them right or wrong. It's just looking at holistically who you are, what you want, and where you want to spend your time. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean I have to have like all 8 categories for me in the air all the time, because maybe only 5 of those categories are the ones that I really care about.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. No.
resonate with you? Does that, I
Yeah.
mean,
No. I mean, I think those are all very good points. And yes, I mean that is literally life. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it is. But what you're describing to me, when I hear that, yes, you are correct. This is why internal personal standards matter so much. It's not the external stuff. Case in point, you talked about things you can't control. I was coming back from the gym a couple of weeks ago, and I pulled out and I was driving down the road, and I was watching this car behind me, and it was, I don't know, it was probably a quarter of a mile back, and it was driving straight, no problem. And another car came out of nowhere and like pulled right in front of this guy. And he was doing probably 50 miles an hour and just T-boned right in the middle of the street. Huge accident. And I say that because that happens in life. Yes, we could label that as a redirection. Yes, that is something that's out of your control, but that's where I think people do differentiate. Going back to your previous question, it's the personal standards that you hold for yourself. It doesn't mean you ignore the problem. It means you focus on the opportunity. And so people in that situation, I would expect them to be pretty depressed for a while, right? Obviously ruin the day. Hopefully nothing more happen in terms of the health, but like, what is your other option? Are you just going to use that accident and feel miserable for the rest of your life? Or are you going to say, man, that really sucked.
yeah,
Like, I now need to deviate off course for a little bit and focus on my health or my finances so I can go buy another car or whatever it is. But this is where you have to really understand what you have control over and the things that you don't, right? There's so many things outside of our control, but that internal personal standard is what actually holds us accountable for things. And so I think that's really important to note. And it's not about checking all the boxes. You can't do that. It's
no,
impossible.
it's impossible.
Everybody knows
Yeah.
that. And
I don't think everybody knows that. I think, again, that's a misconception when people hear about the growth journey or raising your personal standards or personal development. Oh, I have to do all of these things. And that is a misconception, because you don't have to check all the boxes all the time.
yeah,
Figure out what's important to you and what's tied to the goals and habits that you're trying to set.
yeah, that's very fair. I misspoke. I shouldn't say everybody knows that. What I think is really important in terms of a takeaway there, though, is to just understand you get to determine where your focus is in life, what is important to you, and nobody else. And there is freedom with spending time and energy behind whatever your focus area is. In habitual growth, as an example, that's why we have certain things, certain categories set up. So, using that car example, if somebody had to go out and actually buy a new car, they're going to probably focus either on professionalism so they can get a job that where they get a promotion and get more money in the door, or their finances. What do I need to rebudget? But that's going to be up until a point where they get a new car, right? And then it could be, hey, now I've got to actually go get myself in better health, or I need to go build my network. And so you can't do everything all of the time. It's not, there is a ton of gray area, but that internal standard is what helps you drive what's important to you, your decision making process. Habitual growth, you and I are just in the building mode, right?
Oh, for yeah.
we know like this is going to take years. We have entered a process where it's not going to be an overnight success. It's going to take a lot of late nights and early mornings and a lot of finances to do this. We're not out here trying to only focus on being zen and spiritual and our physical health. Like that could happen later on after we maybe hire a team and continue to expand, but we get to decide where those decisions are, and our standard I think is kind of the baseline for that. It helps you if I'm sitting at home for 2 weeks and not doing anything. To me as a person, that would drive me crazy. I would
Yeah.
not be able to say I feel okay with this. I'm going to have to say, man, whatever happened in my life to get me to this point didn't work out. I know I'm better than this. Now what do I need to do to fix it, or at least get on a path to do something different?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I am going to stop recording because I have another call in 5 minutes.